Okay, hi everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Well, just me. We're going to be starting with our Find Your Market Rate webinar here pretty shortly, probably in the next 30 seconds. I'm just making sure that we are all set to go on our YouTube and LinkedIn, where we are also streaming live. Hopefully I don't look too washed out. Sometimes my camera has me really washed out. So hopefully I'm showing up okay for you all, but it's okay. You will not need to see much of my face for this webinar. Really, the whole purpose of this workshop today, very quickly, within 30 minutes, I'm going to walk through how to help you find your market rate using a bunch of free resources and tons of tools at your disposal to figure out, are you fairly compensated or not? And if you aren't, what can you do and what, is available to you to make sure that you can get paid your fair market rate. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go into the slides. So for a quick introduction, we're going to start with that. And then within our agenda, we're also going to go over the main important thing, which is what is your market rate? What does that actually mean? What are the important factors to be aware of within it? And how can you use that to your advantage? The other thing that's probably the most important that you're all here for is how to find your market rate. There are 3 ways that I'm going to walk through how to find your market rate, and there's multiple ways within each different option. So we'll walk through all those different ways, and then the next steps. What do you do after you find out that you're fairly compensated or not, and how do you make sure that you are fairly compensated moving forward? So starting with the introduction, hi, my name is Hannah. I'm Hannah Williams. I'm the founder and CEO of Salary Transparency, which is probably why you all are joining me today. You probably saw that we were hosting this webinar on our Instagram page or other channels. If you're joining from Facebook or LinkedIn, I'm sure you've seen my face on our channels. I founded Salary Transparency after finding out that I personally was undercompensated. I used to be a senior data analyst in Washington, D.C., and I found out that I was underpaid about $25,000. So utilizing a bunch of the things that we're going to go through in this workshop is how I also found out that I was underpaid and then made sure that I was fairly compensated in my next role, where I accepted a role for $25,000 more, which really validated that I was undercompensated, but solved my situation. So I'm going to be teaching a lot of the learnings from my own experience in this workshop and things that I've learned along the way. The other thing that I want to talk about that you'll need is just a quick shout out to our sponsor, Capital One Cafe. If you are in need of caffeination during our quick 30 minutes together, we do have a free digital coffee card available to everyone who signed up for this workshop. If you did not sign up and you are joining live from LinkedIn or Facebook and you never submitted your email to join this workshop, no problem. Just go to the link in our bio, our website, go to the links page. You'll see a form. So just submit your email there, and after this workshop is over, I will send you the link, which includes that free coffee card that you can redeem at any Capital One Cafe near you. Other than that, this is also going to be recorded and the slides will be sent in that email as well. So if you'd like to take notes, pen and paper, please feel free. But more importantly, this is all information that I'm going to share with you directly after. So if there's anything that you miss or you're like, Hannah, you went too fast, go back to that slide. Don't worry, I will send you all of these slides after, and you'll probably be hearing a lot of the same information from me over and over again in the upcoming months, because this is information that we need to know lifelong, and we're constantly learning upon it. So stick with me, and we'll get to the end of this pretty quickly. So to start off, what is a market rate? A lot of people, are unsure what this means. What is the range? What is the criteria? So that's what we're going to start with. The boring definition, standard definition of a market rate is the going rate that the employment market is willing to offer for your role. What's important about this is that the going rate is constantly changing, meaning that what you were making in 2012 is definitely not what you should be making today in 2024. And sometimes, depending on the employment market and industry that you work in, it can vary even more so within a year. For example, the tech industry. there's been a lot of layoffs recently that have affected the employment, market rate of a lot of people in that industry, a lot of people that work in tech. So, what's important here is having an understanding of your industry and your role and making sure that you're aware of the times and what's happening. And if there are major layoffs happening, are you noticing a decrease in your market rate? And how can you constantly be working to adjust and whether increase or decrease your market rate to make sure that you're asking for the most accurate number possible? So there's a lot of factors that affect market rate, one of which we just talked about, which is unemployment. But there's a lot of more standard factors that if you are joining us, anywhere, put in the comment section what factors you think would affect a market rate, and we'll go through some of those more common ones. So let me know, what kind of factors do you think affect market rate? The number one that comes to mind for me is location. So whether you live in a higher cost of living or lower cost of living area is definitely going to affect your location. For example, someone that works in New York is probably making more in the exact same role than somebody who is in the same role in Iowa, for example. So just be aware of your location, and more specifically your location and the company's location, because if you work remote, sometimes that is important to be aware of. Education is also another important factor. I'm sure a lot of people have probably thought about this one already, but if you have, a degree that is very relevant to your career, like you have an engineering degree and you're an engineer, you're probably going to have a higher market rate than someone that does not have that formal education. However, education is not limited to just a degree. You can go, with a completely irrelevant degree, but go through webinars, workshops, trainings, certifications, actual, trainings that you have a certificate at the end of and proof that you have learned a new skill or concept. That is relevant education. So if you are worried that, well, I don't have, a 4-year degree, think about other things that you can add and tailor to your resume that show that you have the education backing the skills that you are applying for. So education is another important one. Years of experience is another one, and this is both direct and indirect years of experience. If you've seen our interviews, I ask people what they do for a living and how much they make. You will know that there is a difference. When people answer, they usually will tell me the direct years of experience that they've been at their current company. But total years of experience is just as important. It doesn't matter how long you've been at one company, when in the grand scheme of things, you might have decades of experience. So be sure that when you are applying or, doing a salary negotiation, that you point out that your total years of experience and all the experiences you've had within that are just as important as the direct years of experience you might have in a certain field or at a certain company. Figure out how to leverage that to your advantage. Company size is one that is a little bit less common, but just as important, because if you work at a larger company, oftentimes they might have more budget to hire somebody in the same role than a smaller size company. That doesn't mean that you cannot be fairly compensated, because what's important here is to know the difference between base salary and total compensation. Sometimes a large company will be able to give you a larger base salary package, or they might give you stock options, other things that will make up your total compensation. If you are applying at a smaller company and the base salary is not as competitive as at a larger company, there are ways that you can ask for different benefits to increase your total compensation so that you are more fairly compensated and that it evens out. The other one is industry, kind of similar to, education and years of experience. Having experience and working in a directly related industry to your role will have an impact on your market rate. Sometimes it might have an impact in the opposite way, though, because what people frequently think is that, for example, if you work in tech and you work in the tech industry, like you have a tech role, you're a software engineer, and you work in the tech industry, people would think that you might be able to command a higher salary in the tech industry. That is true, possibly for more higher up companies like the FANGs, Metas, Apples, all of that. But what you might find is a smaller size company that is in a totally different industry, maybe textiles, might have a huge goal to launch a new app or a new project, and they need a software engineer for that. So while a different industry sometimes might command a lower market rate than a relevant industry, you might find companies where you can ask for a competitive market rate because of their goals. So that's important. If you are interviewing at a company that is in a different industry than what your role is typically geared towards, make sure that you understand why they're hiring you and the importance of your role within their team. Because if you are incredibly important, but in a non-relevant industry, you can still command a high market rate. All right, the last thing that we'll touch about for market rate is the range size. A lot of people ask me, how large should my range be? Should I ask for, between $100,000 to $150,000? How do I narrow that down? The simple answer is that you should have no more than about a $20,000 min-to-max difference between your range. So $100,000 to $120,000 is a great example. You want to give yourself that $20,000 range, and we're going to figure out, in the next slides, how to get all that data and figure out what that range would be, based on your data. You want to give yourself that range though, because when you are negotiating for a job, you want to start at the higher end of your range, which is encompassing your direct market rate. If the company decides to negotiate down, they can't afford the highest rate you're asking for, you can still negotiate down and stay within your range. If you choose one number as your market rate, you kind of pigeonhole yourself to going below that, but rarely ever above it. A company is never going to tell you, hey, there's more money on the table that you forgot about. Give yourself that range so you can negotiate and stay within the range by the time you get the offer in hand. All right. Next slides. So now we're going to go over how to find your market rate. This is the nitty gritty, the really important stuff. There are 3 different ways and options that you can use to find your market rate. The first one we're going to start with is with salary databases. And remember, I said that there are multiple options within each option. So there are 2 types of salary databases that I want you to leverage when you are doing research in general salary databases. The first one is a general salary database, and you want to get about 2 to 3 good sources from them, and then specific salary databases, getting 2 to 3 specific sources from those as well. What is the difference between the two? A general database is one that you're probably more familiar with, like the Indeeds, the Glassdoors, the Salary.coms, the pay scales. What we mean by general is that they have loads and loads and loads of data, which is great. But if you are looking up your salary, trying to Google, or search in Indeed data analyst, you're going to get a result, but it's aggregated data, meaning that it's basically an average of the thousands of rows of data that they have. So they'll give you an estimate, but it's not specific. So we're going to go on to that with the next option of specific salary databases. But general salary databases are a really good place to start because they will help you figure out what that range size should look like. So go to about 2 to 3 general, really large databases. Note down some data that is as specific as possible that you can find, save it, and then move on to the specific salary databases. Now, what is the difference with those? It's the opposite of what a general database is. When you go to a specific salary database, you are often able to get an individual row of data. That is exactly what our database, salarytransparency.com, is. If you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend it. We've spent a lot of money building this, but also put so much time and effort to build a amazing product that actually delivers on transparency in a way that the general databases don't. So the difference here is if you go and search, a data analyst on our database, it will spit back out every single row of data that we have that is one data analyst. And you can further filter that down by location, years of experience, all the factors that we mentioned that are important factors to consider when figuring out your market rate. And you can find the rows of data that are most applicable and comparable to you. Because what you want to do is find somebody that is in as similar a position as you and compare yourself to them. You don't want to be a junior analyst comparing yourself to a senior analyst. So this is where the specific databases are going to help you further tailor down the large range that you will compile with the general salary databases. Got it? Okay. Other specific databases that I mentioned, there's tech-specific databases like levels.fyi, Blind. There's creative-specific databases called Aquint. Also, I shouted out public databases. So if you work for the government or any government entity, salaries are already 100% transparent. Some people don't know that. So if you want to work for the federal government, just go to USA Jobs or the .gov site of the company or federal, entity that you want to work for, and the salaries will be listed there. So you already have a leg up, just something to know. So use general, specific salary databases, gather all your data, and then let's move on to number 2 on how to find your market rate. This is the one that a lot of people get more nervous about, which is networking, because it involves talking to people about compensation. But I would argue that networking is oftentimes going to be the most important way to find your market rate, because you can have conversations with people to build on what you know, and they can answer you when you ask, what's the difference? How were you able to get more? Did you negotiate? What did you negotiate for? How did that experience go? So that is the value of networking. The good thing here is I'm going to give you an introvert and an extrovert option, meaning that there are 2 options if you want to directly talk to people face to face, or if you want to talk to them virtually. The key here that I want to highlight is that you always want to ask more than one person. The same way that the general and the specific databases, I recommend getting 2 to 3 good sources of data. It applies here as well. Why? This is very important. So listen up. If you ask one person how much they make and they answer, but you don't know that they are undercompensated and neither do they, you have just now baselined yourself and your market research at a lower level than it's supposed to be, which is why you need to ask more than one person, because that second person you talk to could have a wildly different salary than the first one. And you might realize, A, that the other person who helped you out is also underpaid and work together to get fairly compensated, or B, you'll realize that the second person is fairly in line in compensation with the first one, and you'll have a good understanding of what the market rate of that role should be. So please ask more than one person. The first way, that is probably the easiest and most direct, is to ask your coworkers. This is incredibly important because your coworkers, and what I mean by coworkers is not, Angie in accounting when you work in HR. You want to ask coworkers that are in the same department, same team, nearly as similar role as possible as you. This is difficult if you are the only person on your team in that role. I was that way, and so it was hard for me to find my market rate. I figured it out. Don't worry, all the other options we're going to talk through today helped me figure out my market rate. But if you do have a colleague that is in the same role as you, that is the person you should be talking to, because figuring out that you are fairly compensated in your company is the number one way to be fairly compensated. The general market rate in the economy is constantly changing, but what you make at a company in the same role as somebody else should be fairly equitable with any other person in that role. And if it's not equitable, you need to work together to figure out what those differences are. If you have a conversation with a colleague in a similar role and they're making wildly less or wildly more than you, you do not, have a knee-jerk reaction that you feel that unfair inequity has occurred. That is not the case. Sometimes somebody can be making more than you because of something that you are not aware of. That direct years of experience, that direct education. You need to have the conversation with them to make sure that you are fairly compensated and not immediately pull out your pitchfork and think inequity when you have it. Get to the bottom of the issue. The other thing is LinkedIn connections. And I saw we have a question from Sharon. Let me address it after I finish this slide. But the LinkedIn connections is also another way that you can virtually talk to people in the same line of social media and talking with creators and comments. So this is the introvert option if you don't want to have the extrovert conversation with someone like a coworker or somebody that is in the same role. Social media is an amazing tool that is available to us because platforms like LinkedIn and TikTok have all these professionals that some are already making content about their jobs and already being transparent, and they've opened the door to you. So reach out to creators that you find on LinkedIn or on TikTok, and then actual professionals that you find on LinkedIn, and ask them, hey, I think that I'm unfairly compensated. This is how much I'm making. can we have a conversation about your compensation to make sure that I am being fairly compensated as well? Being upfront about the reason you want to have that conversation and how much you make is the best way to open that door to the conversation. You have to present transparency first before asking others for their transparency. I am the only person who can break that rule because it is my job to ask people how much they make. But I will tell anybody who asks how much I do make. So you have to be willing to also be transparent with them in order to have that fair conversation. Just something to know. Really quickly, I want to read this comment from Sharon. Most people do not want to tell you their salary. I wouldn't want to be asked. That's great. My question to you then is, how you value and benefit from transparency with that mindset. Transparency is really important to everyone. And you absolutely do not have to answer that question. But I think it's important to understand why we're having these conversations and that talking about our compensation is not something that should be personal. It should not have, that personal connection. It's just that people want to make sure that they're fairly compensated. It doesn't mean that you are, more valuable or less valuable than somebody. It's just a number. It's not personal. It's what your market rate is. We need to remove the social constructs tied to our compensation in order to move forward equitably. Okay, so then the third option on how to find your market rate is to check salary transparency laws. This is my real hidden secret gem tip here. The value is if you live in a state that has a pay transparency law, you have this tool available already. That companies that are required by your state's law, and I have a scam call coming, sorry about that. If you live in a state that has a pay transparency law, you will have jobs that already share the salary. And that is amazing. That means that you can actively compare your current salary, to what employers are currently paying for your role. However, if you do not live in a state with a pay transparency law, here's how you can use this to your advantage. You can look up similar roles in nearby states with as close cost of living as possible, figure out what those jobs are paying in that area, throw that number into a cost of living calculator, and you can adjust it pretty close to what the role would pay in your area. And this is something that I've confirmed with other HR departments about how they figure out market rates and what they will pay people. They use tools that will adjust market rates around the country for cost of living based on where people live. So this is what this is what employers are using to determine how much they will pay you. So you can do the same as well. If you do not know if your state has a pay transparency law or what it is, there is a link in these slides that I will be sharing with everyone. You can also access it right now if you go to our website, salarytransparency.com, go to the resource hub, go to the need to know tab, and you'll find our article on pay transparency laws. And we have an interactive map that you can click around and see which states have what. We've recently updated it as well, so it's pretty up to date. There's about 12 states now that have pay transparency laws, and many more in the works. So be sure that you are aware of what your state's movements are regarding pay transparency. All right. What are the next steps? We've got about 5 more minutes here, which is perfect. We are perfectly on time. So what do you do if after going through all these different options to find your market rate, you know how much you should be making, you have that solid range. Now you find out that you are not being compensated within that range. What do you do? Never accept less than what you are owed is my advice. You should always be making what you deserve and what the market is compensating your role. So you can negotiate for a higher salary at your current job and ask for a raise, or you can start negotiating and interviewing elsewhere to get a higher compensation elsewhere. This is personal. What you decide to do is entirely up to you. I will just give you the tools and resources to make sure that you are as successful as possible, whichever direction you choose to go. We have a free salary negotiation guide and a free market research guide on our website that has, scripts, tools, advice in every single scenario you might find yourself in. If you try to ask for a raise, how do you do that at your company? If you start interviewing and you start, going through the steps of a salary negotiation for an offer, we will help you do that. So we will not leave you out to dry. We will give you the scripts and the advice to negotiate and make sure that you are fairly compensated. But please do not accept anything less than what you deserve, because in this economy, that's not acceptable. The next thing is to practice pay transparency. Sharon, I hope you're still watching, but really, like, this is a note very much for you that if you are watching this market research webinar and our page where we ask people to be transparent with others has helped you, please pay it forward. It is the only way that we can continue to make positive steps forward in pay transparency and closing pay gaps and making sure that others are also fairly compensated, is working together to remove the taboo of pay transparency. What you make and how much you are paid says nothing about who you are or your value in society. A lot of us have, cultural norms that affect how we view these conversations, but we need to realize that it is just a number. It is a number that is the market rate of everybody else in the area that you work in. And you all need to work together to make sure that you are fairly compensated and setting the standard for what you should be paid. If we all believe in pay secrecy and withholding that information, we are not going to make any positive strides forward. You do not have to share your salary with anyone, but if you want to help others be fairly compensated, I strongly suggest that you do. The last thing that I'll add is to ask for what you deserve. Please know that you are worth it. You deserve to be compensated what others make in your role. You deserve to be fairly compensated. And so pay it forward, share your salary, be transparent. If you want to do so anonymously, you absolutely can. We have a salary database on our website. You can submit your salary anonymously, but that is also being transparent and it is helping others make what they deserve. So thank you so much. I hope that this workshop was helpful. I'm going to stick around for the next 3 minutes. So if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We are live on LinkedIn and YouTube, so I will also check questions in the chat there. As I mentioned earlier, if you want to get a free coffee at Capital One Cafe, if you want to get a copy of these slides, if you want to get a recording of this webinar, please just sign up at the link in our bio. We have a landing page where you can submit your email, get on that list so that when I send out the email later, you get access to the list. I cannot send it to you, obviously, if I do not have your email. So if you'd like to get it, just make sure that you're on that list. And you can get a free coffee at your closest Capital One Cafe. And shout out to Capital One Cafe for supporting our page, believing in financial transparency, and really encouraging all of you to be paid what you deserve and giving you the tools and resources to do so. So thank you so much. I'm going to see if we've got any comments. Also, if you don't have any questions or comments, feel free to drop down in the chat, what you'd like to see from us next. If there's any jobs you'd like us to interview, I always take recommendations. It's where we get a lot of our inspiration from, is from all of you. So please let us know what you'd like to see because we read the comments and we would love to take your advice. Trina, Toya, hi, hello. Nice to see y'all on YouTube. Very cool. Oh, Muffin Daredevil. I don't know what that emoji is, but I like your username. That is funny. All right, let's see. I'm not seeing any questions from all of you. So I guess that about wraps it up. I hope you all gained value from this and that it was, important and interesting and that it's going to help you all moving forward. If there's any feedback or anything you'd like to share with me after, please feel free to send me an email. I really welcome any positive dialogue. My email is hannah@salarytransparency.com. And I hope to see y'all on social soon and that you all have a great weekend. All right. Bye, everybody. Have a good one.